so delighted to be here with Dex Hunter-Torricke of the Facebook, Meta, I should say, Oversight Board. One of the most interesting and unique experiments in one of the most important areas, the moderation of what we can and can't put online. Dex, welcome.
Good to be here.
Let's just start by helping me understand the principles underlying the Oversight Board. So there are 20 people on it. Why 20? Why not 7? What are the core principles that underline the design of it?
Yeah, so we have 23 now. We've grown a little bit. The way we've looked at it is to make decisions about content for a global set of platforms. Facebook and Instagram have billions of users, around 3 billion. We need to have members on an independent body who represent the huge diversity of that user base. Many different backgrounds, many different communities, who can help solve some of those really complex challenges that users are facing every single day on those platforms. So our starting point was really, how can we get enough different points of expertise that we can make informed judgments about these issues? Over time, I expect the board will grow larger and we'll have more members adding to that.
So the question, or the topic of oversight boards and content moderation boards has really come up recently because Elon Musk has said that he'd like one for Twitter. You worked for Elon Musk. What advice would you have for him on this topic?
Well, look, I think the first thing I would say when looking at Twitter and how to moderate content there is you have to start with the principle of do no harm. And I mean that in the sense that medical professionals look at patients. When you make decisions here, for platforms like Twitter, which are part of the critical infrastructure of free expression around the world for many millions of people, including activists, people who are struggling for better lives, for democracy in societies facing conflict. The decisions you make in California can be immensely consequential. And so actually making very rapid, knee-jerk decisions about the direction of content, about content policy, that's probably not the right way to go. From the Oversight Board perspective, what we have repeatedly encouraged Meta to do with how they moderate content is to be transparent about how they make decisions, really to show how they've come to a decision so that it builds trust with users. Trust in social media companies and in business, I think, has taken an absolute rollicking over recent years. And certainly, I think it will not be helpful for restoring trust if you have Elon making decisions where people wonder, is this being driven mainly because of Elon's personal preferences? I do think as well, if you're building a content council, it has to genuinely operate independently from the company. It cannot be something that just reflects Elon's personal preferences.
Yeah, because as you referred to, the key decision when Meta set up, or Facebook as it was then, set up the Oversight Board, was that Mark Zuckerberg essentially stepped back and said, you take over this. He didn't actually step back all the way, but he did step back a little bit. I mean, you know Elon Musk, right? Does he have the self-discipline, the self-control? I mean, just does he have the character to take a decision like that?
Yeah, I mean, Elon is somebody who famously describes himself not as a micromanager, but as a nano-manager. He's somebody who often likes to be very involved in things that are quite intricate, and you think other CEOs might not be that invested in that element. Certainly, I think...
That sounds like a no.
I think based on the last couple of weeks, I think it's a couple of weeks, though it seems longer, he is unlikely to be very detached from these decisions. We'll have to see how it unfolds. I mean, I understand that he's probably minded to bring in another CEO to run Twitter so he can go back to focusing on other parts of his business interests, and that would probably be the right way to go. I think Twitter needs a lot of attention, and if Elon's going to be providing that, I wonder who's going to be running the shop at Tesla and SpaceX.
And just to say, is that if the overlord of the company is involved in a project like the Oversight Board, it can't work, can it?
Yeah, I mean, the Oversight Board operates completely independently from the political, the commercial, the public relations interests of Meta. We, frankly, don't care what Mark Zuckerberg thinks about the decisions we make. We are there to advocate for users, to ensure that users are being treated fairly. Elon does not need to be involved. He should not be involved in making those incredibly consequential decisions. I think he needs to take a step back. There need to be policies and processes that people can have trust in that really allow this content council to operate independently.
Okay, Elon, if you're listening, there you go, some advice for free. I want to talk about some specific cases, but before I do, can you give me a sense of the scale of the operation? with just a few numbers. So how many cases have been referred to you, or have people made referrals by appealing to you?
Yeah, so we've received over 2 million appeals from users to date, and a small number as well from Meta. Okay. Of those, we've done 29 big case decisions.
So, 29 of 2 million?
29.
So why not more?
Yeah, so the way to think about it, right, is we are not a general customer service mechanism for Meta. So we're not going to be in a position to answer all of those 2 million cases. We could have 10 times as many board members. I still think we wouldn't be able to answer all of those. What we're trying to do in each of those cases is diagnose big, underlying systemic problems with Facebook and Instagram, which we then tell the company to go away and fix. So in those 29 cases, we also delivered over 130 recommendations of things that have to change on Facebook and Instagram. And the company's agreed to more than 60% of those. We think that's a pretty good batting average. All of the decisions we've made about individual content as well, the company has committed to, and they've implemented what the board has told them.
So just to pick up on something you said there, the company, you've made 130 recommendations and the company has picked up 60%. I mean, the Oversight Board is often referred to as the Supreme Court for Meta. But when the Supreme Court says something, the government has to do it.
Sure.
This isn't the case, right?
Definitely, we don't use that Supreme Court framing. Others use it as a sort of, easy shorthand for referring to this kind of body. And I think the reason they do that is we are a new type of entity. We are a self-regulatory body designed to solve some of these challenges within the tech industry. Nothing like this has been attempted before. I think, honestly, the fact that Meta has agreed to more than 60% of those recommendations, which are very consequential, which potentially impact hundreds of millions of users' experience on the platform, I think that's a good thing. Obviously, we'd like that they accept all of them, but baby steps.
Okay, and just on the, I know you're doing your best, but 29 out of 2 million, what about expanding the board, say to 40?
Yeah, over time, the board may end up being 40 members. I expect will grow over the coming months. But those 29 decisions, if you go and look at them, and of course, if you go on our website, you can read all of those decisions in extraordinary, wonky detail. They are very significant changes to the platform. Just one single example, right? Because of the Oversight Board's work, more than 800 million users of Meta's platforms can now actually read the rules of those platforms in their own languages. That may not sound like a big deal. On its own, it's a single thing, but it's an important part of building transparency. And those 130 other recommendations, each of those is something that additive will reshape the experience for users on the platforms.
Are you having difficulty hiring people? Because I know the ambition is to get to 40. Are you having difficulty getting new members because Meta gets a final say on who's on the board?
No, we honestly haven't had particular difficulties with that. We added the 3 additional members just this year. What we have been doing, though, is taking a lot of time to determine what are those extra points of expertise, and also to work out how scaling the number of members will impact the overall institution. So because we are a new body, this is a new way of working, those small changes, which may sound sort of self-evident, they actually may have outsized impact on the quality of decisions. So right now, for example, every decision the board makes gets approved by the entire board. So that was designed to prevent any single member or small set of members from having an outsized impact on these very consequential issues. If you had 40 members instead of 20, obviously unanimity or a majority there is going to be much more challenging to achieve. So it's working out how to scale, but effectively.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about some specific cases, because once you get into the specifics, I think it is unbelievably fascinating how this all works. But first, just to remind everyone here that you can submit questions by scanning the QR code on your seat. Or if you're watching on TV or online, then you can submit your questions on Twitter using the hashtag BigIdeasLive22. Right, so let's talk about a specific case, a recent one. Can you tell me about the case of the Russian Nazi?
Yeah, sure. So, this is a very recent case decision that came from the Oversight Board. This was a post in the context of the Ukraine conflict where someone was calling for death to the fascist invaders.
That's what they said in their post, death to the fascist invaders.
That's right. And there was an image as well as poetry, I believe, in that case. And this was content that was removed by Meta from the platform. And after the board looked at it, we said that was the wrong decision. And actually, we required it to be restored to the platform, which the company did. And the reason for that is you had to look at speech in the context of what was happening in Ukraine, an unlawful invasion of a country with people in Ukraine and many voices outside of Ukraine looking to support the population there. Naturally, contextualizing the violence that was taking place in Ukraine in the context of other historical injustices that have unfolded in Ukraine. So in that context, actually, we said this is perfectly legitimate speech. This is something that, in the context of a conflict, is something that should be permitted. It doesn't represent hate speech. Calling for the death to the fascist invaders there, in that context, was referring to Russian military forces who were acting as aggressors. So that's one example of the sort of very consequential free speech and human rights issues we deal with.
And if I understand the case correctly, part of it was that the post said, kill the fascists, kill him, kill him, kill him. This is something, of course, that would never be permitted normally on Facebook, because one thing you're absolutely not allowed to do is make threats of violence. But this reference, this kill the fascist phrase, was a reference to a poem from, I believe, the 1940s. And this level of specificity is exactly what you're dealing with. So on this question then, in the end, you decided that the post should go back up. That took quite a while to decide. What difference does it really make to anyone on the ground if, in the end, you've decided that in this very specific circumstance, actually, this one relatively small post can exist?
Yeah, so this is exactly where the recommendations we make in those cases do have an impact. And I think they're the most important part of those decisions. Requiring Meta to build policies and systems that can understand that context. The guidance that they provide their content moderators as they apply the rules when they're looking at many future instances of content, that's where we can truly have an impact. So you're entirely right. On a single piece of content, it may or may be not be so influential, but in future cases, because of the board's work and the way we've scrutinized those breakdowns in the policies and the systems, that will have an impact for many, many more people.
So can you say then that the way that the war in Ukraine is being talked about by people on Facebook has been changed as a result of the oversight board?
I think it's something which will make a small change, and it will add up to a much larger set of changes that Meta has also, of course, been doing itself since the conflict began. And they've had to change a lot of the ways they look at content. They've had many new challenges that have emerged in the context of that crisis. This is another contribution from our side.
Just a reminder that you can all post your questions. Please do scan the QR code on your seat. Right, you mentioned moderation, and I think I really want to talk about this because I think this is so important, or rather the practice of moderation. So for those who don't know, a lot of moderation on Facebook is done by algorithms. It's done by what some people call AI, but it's really just automated sifting of content. And then some of it is done by a large group of people for a Silicon Valley company. In other words, really a very small number of people given the scale of Facebook. I think it's helpful to talk about a specific case to get us into this. So can you tell me about the case of the Brazilian nipple?
Yes. This is a case that we took on a couple of years ago now. And this was a piece of content on Instagram that was removed through automated moderation by an AI system. And it contained a nipple. And of course, Instagram has rules around nudity. What the system did not understand is that this piece of content was in the context of a user raising awareness about breast cancer. And of course, that is something which the board, when it looked at that, we said, first of all, that is a legitimate thing which should be allowed on the platform. And subsequently, because of the board's decision, Instagram actually revised its community guidelines to allow that. So we've taken away that problem for users. People should be allowed to post about breast cancer on Instagram, which includes images of nudity. With AI, of course, there's a much larger set of problems here, which you very rightly pointed out have been exposed by this case.
Yeah, because just to say is that post, that nipple, which was put up in the context of breast cancer awareness, was removed by AI, wasn't it? So yeah, so what is it? So okay, so you made your decision. What does this mean in practice then? The AI gets reprogrammed. The moderators, they get a little different line in their book of things they're not allowed to put on.
That's exactly right.
Tell me what happens.
That's exactly right. So the decisions of the board go back to refining the processes and the way those processes are enforced at Meta. And we don't take the company's word for this, I should say. We have a whole team on the board side, which we imaginatively call the implementation team, which studies in depth how the company implements the board's decisions. We report on all of that publicly through our quarterly and annual reporting. So that is exactly what is supposed to happen. With AI, obviously, there is no future for content moderation on platforms which have billions of users unless AI is part of that. I talked about the impossibility of any set of humans, even if we doubled or trebled the size of our board, to deal with all of those problems. So you do need to have AI, but you do need to refine those systems and understand where they're breaking down.
I find that interesting because, to me, reading the cases of the oversight board, what really comes out is just how important context is. Context is everything. But robots, or AI, or whatever we call it, they're not great at context. Can automation actually do this job in a way that is fair to humans?
Yeah, I mean, AI has definitely, obviously, advanced enormously over the last decade. It's doing, in a lot of cases, an okay job at looking at that context. And of course, this is a lot of engineering work, right? To build in the understanding with these systems that can really pay attention to very intricate social, economic, political situations, the backdrop of that content. But over time, this is something that absolutely is going to pose a technical challenge. It is something that the more you get into very niche situations, you understand the limitations of the existing systems. It's something we're going to have to solve and figure out what the limits are.
Have you looked at all at the condition of human moderators? Because we're talking about people here. We know from whistleblowers that human moderators might be asked to make a decision in 10 seconds. They're exhausted. They're burdened by how much they have to do. Many are, or some are suffering from PTSD of the things they've seen. And these might be people who are operating, say, in a war zone, where, in fact, there's been a war recently in Ethiopia. I don't know how many moderators Facebook has for the languages of the warring parties, but I'm going to guess it's not very many.
Right.
This strikes me as one of the real issues for the Oversight Board, in that you might be delivering your high-minded judgments, but they're being implemented on the ground by people whose working conditions make it almost impossible for them to do a fair job. Have you investigated that?
Yeah, so I should say we do look at how some of those human elements of moderation fit in with broader systemic issues at Meta. So one example, very specifically, we had a case from Myanmar where we found that there probably wasn't sufficient guidance given to content moderators to allow them to look at content in the language it was actually posted. So our guidance back to Meta was, you can't make decisions in that way. You need to ensure that there are sufficient language and translation resources available so that moderators can actually look at the content in that language. It is something that is a bigger problem. We've had some conversations with folks who are representing that community of human moderators. It's not a thing that has been the main focus for the board. And for that, I would say...
Why not? Because it seems absolutely key. Have you audited the work of the moderators, for example?
It's an important problem. It's not the one the board was designed to do. And we are very candid that we are a small body designed to do one thing very, very well, which is look at content and try to reconcile the policies and the processes of Meta with some of its human rights obligations. There are other players who need to be involved in solving these problems, not just us. We're part of an ecosystem of solutions. This is where regulators, this is where researchers, this is where civil society also come into the picture.
I mean, well, but this seems to me completely crucial. I mean, so again, to take the war in Ethiopia, Facebook has been implicated with amplifying the violence by allowing hate speech on its platforms. Ultimately, if there are only, 5 moderators there for the entire language of one warring party, I mean, really, this could cause really bad things to happen.
Yeah, sure. So, I should stress, that is the sort of thing we do look at. So whether there are human elements that contribute to the outcomes that are being produced in these cases, but actually solving this is, for example, looking at labor conditions for moderators. That's absolutely an important problem. This is not to deny that for a second. That's not going to be the thing the board is going to solve on its own. And we need to be realistic about the resources and the expertise we have on our side.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Right, we have time for questions now. And we have a question from Colleen Cotter. Colleen, hello. Would you mind telling us your question, please? If you give us a second, wait for the mic to get over. This is, I think, a very relevant question given what we were just talking about.
Yes, you're talking about context, so you're covering some of that, but I just wondered, how do you account for language and cultural variation of meaning? That's, you've already been addressing a lot of that, but I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about that. Thank you.
So a question on language and cultural variation of meaning. Something you must have really thought about.
Absolutely. So, I mean, for a very long time, I think a lot of board members have had a view that the way content is moderated is often very Western-centric and often very US-centric. And if you look at any number of examples of content issues in the global South, we've seen communities that are repeatedly not well served by the decisions and the policies of big tech platforms. And so for that reason, the board has been very focused on looking at Global South communities in particular, underrepresented communities historically, who have often been marginalized when it comes to these tech issues. Over half of the board's cases to date have been from the Global South. In those cases, very often it is linguistic and cultural nuance that is a critical part of that context that we talked about, and the ability to treat users fairly and to make the right decisions about content. And so the board itself is very, very diverse. We've got 23 board members. They've lived in, I believe, 29 countries. They speak 27 languages. We are constantly bringing in outside points of expertise as well. We have a system called the public comment process, which allows any person, any of you, to contribute your point of view to how we interpret decisions. Lots of civil society organizations and researchers in the Global South are often engaging with us on these cases, and we engage with them regularly. So I think we're making progress towards that. There's still much more work to be done, though, and I think Meta needs to do a better job there.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Chris Chohan. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Chris, hi. Can you wait for the mic to come over and stand up and ask your question?
Thanks very much.
Hi, can we?
Yeah, just checking that was working. Just on the topic itself as well, I suppose, in a bit more broader sense, as part of the oversight group, who moderates the moderators, and how can we ensure that people see this as trustworthy and effective?
The big question, who moderates the moderators?
Yeah, who watches the watchmen? One of the things that I think is critical, and this is certainly the same advice I would give to Elon as he thinks about this Content Council proposal, is we are very transparent about the work we do, as well as being, I think, often very Western-centric in terms of content moderation. I think most people would agree the way that Silicon Valley companies have made these big decisions have been very opaque. We're talking about researchers and policymakers and regulators even, who are really struggling often to understand what's the rationale for some of these incredibly consequential decisions that end up impacting millions of people's lives. So from our side, we put all of our working out in public, pretty much as far as we can, obviously while ensuring that people's privacy and security is protected in some of these communities. The other thing we do is we are very, very open and structured about the principles and the mechanisms we use to actually make decisions within the board. So you can go and read our literal rule book. For members, it's on our website. You can see our bylaws and how we're structured. And we also have an independent trust with a set of trustees who are there to scrutinize the board and make sure that we're upholding our mission.
Mm-hmm. We've got another question from Dino. Hiya, in the audience. Yeah, if you wait for the mic to come around. Yeah, really interesting question.
Hello, I've got a question really about jeopardy. So a lot of moderation is, I guess, seen as invisible takedowns. We don't see it when it happens unless it hits the news. So the personal responsibility or the learnings for the rest of the users are sort of invisible. So is there any power you have to reflect back onto the platform to put jeopardy, like to make people responsible for transgressing rules, or is it just silent takedown is where the future of moderation is?
Yeah, should there be more visible signs that someone's been sanctioned?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Certainly there's a piece of material that we're going to be publishing over the next few weeks on something called Crosscheck. And Crosscheck, for those who don't know it, is the system that Meta uses to moderate, in particular, high-profile and VIP accounts on Facebook and Instagram. And this is a system that came to a lot of public prominence last year when Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, revealed some of the problems that really are plaguing how that cross-check system is applied. So in the reporting that came out in the Wall Street Journal first, Frances Haugen argued that actually the way cross-check was being applied to content often spoke to behind-the-scenes decisions by the platform that were often not necessarily motivated by any coherent principles. And the board has been studying this since. Meta referred this to the board for us to investigate and to publish an opinion on how they should transform that system. This, I think, speaks to exactly what you're talking about, whether there is this iceberg of things that we don't see behind the scenes that end up having very consequential impacts on free expression around the world. How we flag that in public, that is something which raises, obviously, technical issues to some extent, also in some cases things around privacy and ethics for users. But definitely from our side of the house, when we look at these cases, we do want to ensure we're not just going for things that are driving the news cycle. And I think that also goes along with not being super Western-centric. The global media often takes its cues in many ways from news outlets in Europe and the United States. And these are things that often seem like they are the most important issues for everyone, but they aren't.
Thanks, Dex. Dex Hunter-Torricke, thank you so much. A fascinating topic, and one I'm sure we'll be talking about in the weeks and months to come as we see exactly what Elon Musk does at Twitter.